Alright guys, today we are going to be reading an excerpt from a book called Hello Universe. Now this book is good for 3rd grade reading levels all the way up to even 6th grade reading levels, and for guided reading practice this is a level Y book. This story is realistic fiction, and by that I mean while the story and the characters are made up, they are based on real life elements, and the story could actually happen in our world today. So if we were to go ahead and dig into the cover of the story here, you can see that up top we have 3 characters and a dog walking around the woods looking around. And then down below we have another character who looks like they are stuck in some kind of cavern. So by this picture we can infer that our characters up top are searching for our character down below here. And then in the middle in the fine white print it says some friendships are meant to be. So this all gives us a good idea of the direction the story is headed and lets us know what the story may be about. But today we are actually going to pick up in chapter 16, and where we jump in, our main character Virgil, he is out in the woods. He has been sent on a mission by his friend Kaori, who is also a psychic, and he has been instructed to find 5 particular stones. So he's out in the woods right now with by himself with only his pet guinea pig Gulliver, and this is where we are going to pick up at. Chapter 16. Of all the treats in the entire world, celery sticks, baby carrots, orange slices, Gulliver liked dandelions best. It took him less than 5 seconds to eat an entire stem, and then he'd root around for more. For Gulliver, dandelions were a rare delicacy. For humans, they were a noxious weed that needed to stop growing. But grow they did. Dandelions were everywhere in Virgil's neighborhood. They sprouted from the cracks in the sidewalk, leaned against rusty fence posts, sneaked into well-manicured lawns. Virgil plucked them habitually, like an explorer searching for gems. By the time he reached the woods, his left pocket was stuffed with them. He could have stuffed the other pocket too, but he was saving that for the stones. He wasn't allowed to explore the woods alone. The trees were thick in some places and sparse in others. Flowers grew intermittently, a patch of iris here, a colony of dandelions there. Lola was convinced that the woods teemed with snakes, but Virgil was certain that he could find 5 stones here, and not just any stones, but the best stones his town had to offer. He found 2 right away, just a few feet into the woods. Deeper in, the sounds of the neighborhood faded away, and he found another, just like that. He was so focused on looking down, surveying the ground with his eyes, that he barely noticed the ominous rustling sound behind him. But when he heard the shuffle of feet, he jerked around, heart pounding, and stood very, very still. If there was one thing he knew, it was that you had to stay still when faced with the forest beast, otherwise you could become their supper. He didn't see anything, but he was certain that he had heard something, and it wasn't the blowing of the wind or the falling of a twig. Someone, or something, was moving nearby. "Hello?" Virgil said, quietly, like a croak. He thought he heard something, a growl, a snort. He suddenly got the idea that there was a rhinoceros on the other side of the trees, pawing its front hoof in the dirt, bowing its head, steadying its horn, ready to charge. He imagined himself being flung into the air, and landing on the thick gray skin of the giant creature before being trampled. One of Lola's old ghost stories popped into his head. She said that there was once a man who told all his secrets to the trees, and after he died, the trees whispered them to anyone who passed by. Maybe it wasn't a rhinoceros, but a bunch of old trees that were ready to tell the secrets of the dead. Now, if we stop here, now, do I really think that Virgil believes that there may be something like a rhinoceros or living trees or trees that can tell secrets in the woods? Not really. I don't think Virgil believes this, but I think it is painting the picture that he believes something dangerous, maybe something large and dangerous might be in these woods. So it's just painting or it's helping to build the tension to the scene by him running away with his imagination by imagining or thinking of something like a rhinoceros or trees that are ready to tell secrets of the dead from this part. Virgil looked at his phone. It was 10:15. Maybe he'd just snatch up the next stones he saw and rush to Kaori's house. She might not mind if he got there early. But then the shuffling sounded receded and disappeared, and the woods were quiet again. Virgil exhaled. His heart slowed. He looked at his feet, saw a 4th stone, and put it in his pocket. He wondered if he'd picked the best ones. He wondered so deeply that he didn't hear the other shuffling sound, this time approaching from behind. "Hey, retardo." Virgil turned around, startled. Chet Boland's meaty face was a light shade of red, like it was ready to burst. What are you doing out here all by yourself? Lost your mommy? It occurred to Virgil that the bull was also out here by himself, but he wasn't about to point that out. Instead, Virgil said nothing. He stood there, one pocket full of stones and the other full of dandelions, feeling very dumb, like someone had lifted him out of one story and placed him in another, in these unfamiliar woods, in this unfamiliar situation, alone with the bull who was carrying a pillowcase. Virgil wondered what the pillowcase was for, and in the space of about 3 seconds he thought of a handful of terrifying scenarios. The bull would smother him with it. He was using it to carry the bodies of dead animals. He was going to capture animals, smother them, then carry their dead bodies. And Chet wasn't just carrying a pillowcase. He was also wearing a Chicago Bulls t-shirt. Beware the color red. Suddenly, the rhinoceros didn't seem so bad. What's the matter? The bull said. Oh yeah, I forgot. You don't know how to talk. You're a retard. I see you going into that retard class all the time. What goes on in there anyways? A bunch of kids wetting their pants? I bet. In addition to being afraid of the dark, carrying a guinea pig in his backpack, and stuffing his stones full of dandelions and rocks, Virgil had another secret. He weighed only 76 pounds, and even though he pretended to be 5 feet tall, he was actually 4 foot 11. Virgil wasn't sure how much the bull weighed or how tall he was, but he certainly weighed more than 76 pounds. You really are stupid, huh? The bull said. His eyes shifted to Virgil's backpack. Chet took a step forward and Virgil took a step back, which the bull thought was hilarious, because he immediately broke into peals of laughter before ripping Virgil's backpack off his shoulders with such force that Virgil actually spun, and hit the ground with a numbing whack that shot from the palms of his hands to his shoulders. The bull took off like a bullet. Virgil pushed himself up and ran after him, saying, "No, no, no," in the loudest voice he could manage without choking. "Gulliver, Gulliver," he cried, or maybe he only said it in his head. He wasn't sure. The bull darted between the trees, not laughing anymore, just running with Virgil's backpack in his hands. A million horrifying images blazed through Virgil's mind. The bull tearing Gulliver in two, feeding him to a pit of lions, picking him up and tossing him into the trees, which is why he didn't feel any better when the bull finally stopped running and turned to face him, his cheeks flushed and his neck and hairline glistening. Virgil waited for him to open the backpack, discover Gulliver, and destroy him. Instead, the bull took a giant step back, grinned evilly, and turned toward a stumpy circle of stones that Virgil had never noticed before. It was an old well. With 2 hefty shoves, the bull pushed the cover of the well aside and dangled the backpack over the now open hole. "Say bye-bye to your stuff, retardo," he said. The bull let go, and the bag fell into the dark, gaping well, so far down that Virgil didn't even hear it land. "Guess you'll have to get new books, pansy boy," the bull said, his smile widening. "Now, not that you need them anyway, since you probably don't know how to read." The bull wiped his hands on the front of his jeans, as if he'd just finished a dirty, dirty deed, which he had, and then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods and leaving Virgil alone. Chapter 17. There are more than 7,000 islands in the Philippines. Some don't even have people living on them, and then there are some that once had people, but don't anymore, like the lowland island of Balatama. Lola had told Virgil all about it. According to Lola, Balatama was once a thriving island in the south. It thrived so much that the people kept taking land that belonged to the mountain creatures. One day, the people cut down a gathering of trees that belonged to the majestic bird named Pa. Pa had the wingspan of an elephant and talons as sharp as knives. When his trees were cut down, he was so angry that he grew bigger and bigger. When he spread his wings, they were so large and dark that they blotted out the sunlight. This made Pa happy because the darkness blinded the villagers. They would get lost and wander in circles, and then Pa would swoop down, pluck them up, and eat them. Pa controlled the darkness and used it as a weapon. He knew that darkness turned people weak because it confused them and made them wander. The darkness created easy victims because no one could fight an enemy that they could see. Pa's talons would sever the villages in half before they even realized they were in trouble. So this is a point where you wonder what the author is meaning by including this story, or including this character from Virgil's culture's mythology. Because last time, where we just left off in the previous chapter, Chet had just dropped Virgil's book bag with Gulliver down this dark well, leaving his fate unknown. And now we pick up with this Virgil thinking of this story. So why did the author choose to introduce the chapter this way? Well, what I am thinking with this is that the author, she is setting up, or she's helping you to imagine what Virgil is seeing and thinking right now. As he is looking into this well and it's dark at the bottom, he doesn't know what is at the bottom of it. He knows Gulliver and his backpack are down there, but he doesn't know what else is waiting for him down there. And this darkness, this frightening sensation that is building up with him from what is unknown below, reminds him of this story of Pa and the horror that was brought with this creature in his story. Virgil was 8 years old when he first heard the story Pa. Now, as he leaned over the side of the well, he half expected Pa's talons to come shooting out of it, even though it was a bright, sunny afternoon above ground. The deep well that now cradled Gulliver was a dark, dark place, and darkness was darkness whether it was in the sky or not. Virgil's heart thundered in his ears. A tight knot collected in his chest and rose, rose, rose until it pushed its way to his eyes, which pooled with tears. Gulliver, he said. The inky blackness gaped up at him, like a throat of a hungry beast. It smelled musty and dank and deathly. But Gulliver was down there. He couldn't leave Gulliver, not for a second. There was hope, though, a ladder. He had no choice. He emptied his pockets of the stones and set them carefully on the rim of the well. Then he started his journey down. The descent was unsteady. Virgil's foot hesitated before every rung, but ultimately landed, quivering where it belonged. With each step he gripped the ladder tighter and tighter until his knuckles ached. Down, down, down. Was the bottom of the well full of water? Was Gulliver drowning, struggling to breathe? So deep and black was the well that Virgil couldn't see anything, not even when he was 6 rungs down, and for a moment he thought that maybe he descended for nothing. Maybe the bull hadn't thrown Gulliver inside after all, and he just imagined the whole thing. But then, after what seemed like forever, there it was, not floating in water, but slouched on his side at the bottom of the well. The zipper still open just an inch, just enough for Gulliver to breathe. The darkness had invaded Virgil's lungs and choked him to death. And he couldn't breathe until he knew Gulliver was breathing too. He listened for him, chuttering, chirping, anything, but all he heard was the drumming of his own heart. Virgil was still a fair distance from the bottom when he lowered his foot and discovered there was no longer a rung for him to step onto. He clutched the rusty bars and craned his neck to look down, slowly, slowly, so as not to lose his balance, and he'd realized he'd reached the end of the ladder, but he needed 2 more rungs, at least. The backpack wasn't within reach, not even close, and his legs weren't long enough to touch the ground. Virgil could see the backpack. He couldn't tell if there was any movement inside, but he certainly couldn't just climb back out and give up. Not without Gulliver. The thought of abandoning Gulliver was far worse than the realization that he'd have to jump. He pulled himself closer to the ladder, hugging it almost, chest to iron, as if the mere thought of jumping would send him falling to his death. And now he heard his own breathing. It broke through the silence in quick, rapid bursts, like the hiccups. All at once he began to sweat. A faucet inside of him turned on, and everything dampened. The inside of his elbows, the palms of his hands, the space between each of his perfectly shaped fingers, the back of his neck, each hairline follicle on his forehead, his size 5 feet, the space between his shoulder blades, everything. If this was how the body prepared to jump, he thought, it wasn't very useful. He lowered his right foot and pressed the toe of his sneaker against the well, then brought his right hand down to the next iron bar. He stayed like that for several moments, unsure what to do, looking like 2 halves of one boy, one climbing down, the other going up. He didn't lower his left hand until his leg started to ache, and he didn't move his other foot until he absolutely had to. When he did, he was hanging from the third to last rung like they were monkey bars, which he'd never been able to cross in his entire life. He went down to the next bar and pointed his toe to see if he felt the ground. Nothing. He lowered himself again. Now he dangled from the ladder with nowhere else to go but down. He had to let go, but he couldn't. A dozen images fired through his brain. He saw himself clutching a broken arm and wailing in pain. He saw twisted ankles with the bones sticking out, a head injury that left him motionless until he finally evaporated into a skeleton. a bloody gash above his eyebrow as he slammed against the whale's rugged walls. These all seemed likely scenarios, what with the distance to the bottom. But there was Gulliver. Gulliver, said Virgil. He expected his voice to echo, but it didn't. He looked up. The mouth of the whale was a perfect circle above him. There was daylight there, and air. There were trees, and birds, and Lola. The whale smelled like an old sock. The world smelled like trees and grass. He looked up at the light. He looked down at Gulliver. He let go. So this is a very powerful story, powerful moment, not only for this chapter, for the story in its entirety, especially when, as we are characterizing Virgil. This whole chapter so far has been setting up this scene. It has been talking about how dark and scary this well is, and it has been talking about how Virgil, how frightened he is. I mean, his entire body is sweating and tense right now. And he's at this moment now where he's towards the bottom of the ladder, or what is available up the ladder in the well, and he is looking at his options. He can either climb back up and be free, be safe, be back with his family, or back with Lola, and just be safe, or he can go jump down into what is unknown. He doesn't know what quite is down there. He doesn't even know if he'll be able to get back up if he jumps down. All he knows is that Gulliver is down there, and he decides to jump down to save Gulliver. So this is like I said, it's a very powerful moment for the story, and it shows us a lot about who Virgil really is. Because this entire time, he has been shown as a shy boy with not many friends, but this just shows the extent he would go to for his friends, which I think is a really awesome moment. There are many terrible things that can happen to a boy who jumps into a well. He could break his head open, suffer a broken arm, twist his ankle, bones sticking out, all that. Or his cell phone could fall out of his pocket and shatter into a million pieces. Virgil's phone and his feet hit about a half second apart. As soon as he felt the ground under his sneakers and the numb tingling of pain from impact, he realized two things. He had landed safely, and his phone had not. But the first thing he did was grab his backpack and zip it open. He reached in to feel Gulliver, and heard a single healthy chirp. Gulliver was none the wiser. He just wanted a dandelion, so Virgil gave him one. "You're okay," Virgil said, even though Gulliver already knew this. Virgil's heart had been a steady drumbeat in his ears, but it quelled now. He rested the backpack against the wall and reached for his phone. It had broken into 3 pieces: screen, battery, and everything else. Virgil put the pieces back together, because you don't give up without trying, Lola always said. "All the king's horses and all the king's men," said Virgil, snapping the battery in place. It fit fine, but he could see already that there was no hope for the screen. There was a crack in the corner that branched out like a spider web. Couldn't put Humpty together again. He tried to turn it on, but nothing happened. He tried again. He shook it. He took it apart again and put it back together. He kept his thumb on the power button until it hurt. Nothing. He put the phone in his pocket anyway. Then he tipped his head back and looked up, up, up. The light was there, but it was far away, like a cloud he couldn't touch. He stood under the ladder. He reached toward the bottom rung, but his fingertips were nowhere near it. He got on his tiptoes, so high that it hurt, but he still couldn't reach. He bent his knees and jumped with all his might, arms outstretched, and that didn't do any good either. If I were Joselito or Julius, I would have no trouble reaching the ladder, he thought. But then again, if I were Joselito or Julius, I wouldn't be down here in the first place. He jumped again. He looked toward the light. "Hello?" he said, hesitant at first. "Hello?" Then louder. "Hello? Hello? Hello?" He knew it wouldn't do any good. No one was ever out in the woods, and if they were, they probably couldn't hear him. So, for this story, I really think students and children will like this. First of all, for the sense of adventure that really begins to pick up after this, as a result of this situation right here. So there is a sense of adventure that I think students would enjoy. But there are also a lot of topics addressed with our characters that I think students and children will be able to relate to, such as shyness and loneliness and being misunderstood. There are a lot of things that our characters in the story go through, or things that they suffer with as a part of being adolescents, that I think students and children will be able to relate and connect to. And then I also think that they will enjoy one of the main themes of the story, which is friendship. And I think one of the reasons I picked this chapter was because picked this section is because not only is it a pivotal moment, this isn't quite the climax, but it is a pivotal moment in the rising action that leads to the climax. So that is one reason I picked it, but it also, and I talked about this in the middle of the story, but it also shows the friendship and the bond between Virgil and Gulliver. Even though it's a friend with his pet, it's not another person, it still shows the lengths that Virgil will go to protect what he loves, which, like I said earlier, is a very powerful moment, and it kind of adds to the overall theme of friendship that really builds within this story, and all of that I think students will like. But that is it for Hello Universe today.